On this episode of Technicolor Blood, Hollywood and the entertainment world in general loses a couple of legends.
We're going to find out what is new with Chris Pratt and what is new with Dan Akroyd.
We have a lot to get to. Technicolor Blood starts right now. Technicolor Blood, welcome back everyone. Terrence, how are you?
I'm doing pretty good. It's been a bit of a rough week for Hollywood legends.
It has been. We lost a couple of huge iconic folks in the entertainment world and in Hollywood, and we will definitely get to that in just a moment. We're going to start off, as always, with what we've watched since we last met. I'm going to bump through a couple of mine really quickly because I want to give Terrence some room to discuss his. So first, I watched 22 July, which was a Netflix movie directed by Paul Greengrass, which was about a horrific terrorist attack in Norway several years back. And I have to admit that this wasn't really on my radar. I remember when it happened, but I don't remember any details of it. And it's basically just a realistic walkthrough of what happened. Paul Greengrass has, done this before with other movies like United 93, and he just seems to sort of lock into this sort of subject matter. And it did. If the point of the movie was to impress upon the viewer the terror and the horror of what happened in that attack, then it was very successful because it is frightening how well that attack was carried out, and he did a pretty good job of getting that across. But outside of just the realism of it, I don't have a ton to say about it.
This was that white supremacist who attacked that, like they were on an island, some sort of community or camp or something.
So basically what happened was he set off a car bomb, not unlike Timothy McVeigh style, at a government building in Oslo. And the bomb killed, I think, maybe 8 people. And then he left from the bomb site dressed as a police officer, like a SWAT gear police officer. He drove to this island where there were all these youths camping.
Yeah.
And he came with a bunch of gear, and he talked his way across the ferry to get onto the island. And then, things basically went to hell from there. Right. He killed 77 people on the island, which is just I think the total was 77. So 69 people on the island, 8 in the building. And I mean, it is terrifying. The movie is harrowing.
Right. Well, at least I guess it was well done.
Yeah. If you're into true to life, based on a true story type of things, then that's definitely one to check out. On the completely other side of the spectrum, and I can say this with all honesty, I lost a bet, so I had to endure Speed Racer.
Jesus, man.
Yes. So, big Houston Astros fan. A friend of mine is a big Red Sox fan. We had a standing bet. And the reason I was punished with Speed Racer is because the last time this exact same friend and I had a bet, I won it, and I forced him to watch Dreamcatcher for the first time. So he was seeking vengeance on me, which he pulled off, although he loves Speed Racer. And anyway,
so you had to watch,
Julio, if you're listening.
You had to watch baseball and Speed Racer.
That's right.
Dude, that's bullshit.
So yeah, Speed Racer, I will just say this. Clearly this was a passion project. Weirdest passion project ever. They invented colors. They induced mini seizures. I can't say it was good, but for what they were trying to make, I guess it was what it was. I will instantly forget it. And that's pretty much all the time I want to devote to it.
A lot of people like that movie. It's surprising. It's in terms of the Wachowskis' canon of films, it's definitely the one that I see pop up just below the first Matrix film. Right.
It's always the one under that one.
Yeah.
So, it was a thing for sure. even as much as I love Christina Ricci, she couldn't save the experience.
Oh man, I totally forgot she was in that.
She was.
It was made like right after the success of Lost, so it's got one of the Lost actors.
Yes, Matthew Fox plays Racer X.
So many bad decisions were made.
There's a lot going on in that movie.
It's definitely of its single moment in time. That film could not have been that film any earlier or any later than when it was made.
I was very pleased with myself when I forced Julio to watch Dreamcatcher, and he got me back really, really solidly here. So I'm gonna tread carefully before the next bet. So enough of that. Terrence, you have a movie you want to discuss.
Yeah, so the most recent film that I saw was 8th Grade, which was directed by Bo Burnham, which, if that name sounds familiar, you probably know him as a stand-up comedian. He's been pretty successful. He's got several stand-up specials available.
It's very manic.
And yeah, very manic. I feel like he might have gotten his start on YouTube. He feels like a YouTube,
I think that's correct,
era comedian.
A lot of piano at the same time.
Yeah.
Songs interspersed.
But he doesn't star in this movie, and it has no real connection to his style of humor, other than, you know, the influence of social media onto people's lives. Mm-hmm. It's as the name would imply, it's the story of a girl in 8th grade. It's about a week of her life, and the movie has a fairly loose narrative structure. You couldn't really say that it has a plot. It's more just a series of events that stack on top of each other. It's kind of like, you know, the greatest hits of moments from your 8th grade. Sure, you know, that last year in junior high or elementary school, depending on where you live and how it's classified. But, you know, right before you take the big leap into high school.
Right.
And so I enjoyed it. It's definitely a movie worth seeing if you are curious about, you know, kind of some of the things that kids that age are going through and would like to see how Hollywood explores it. It's definitely a period of life that Hollywood really has no use for. Mm-hmm. Kids that fall into that era, you know, they're too young to do the kind of stories that you want to do with teenagers, and they're too old for kind of cutesy, silly kids movies.
Right.
So for the most part, I feel like Hollywood just skips over that demographic. Mm-hmm. And here was a movie that just fully embraces it and explores it. The girl who's cast in the lead, she's very good. She's very good with the caveat that she's very good for a kid actor.
Right.
And there's a lot of kid acting. It's 90% kid acting. She is by far the best of them. So it's enjoyable to watch her on her own. She spends a lot of time on her own or interacting with her father. Her father is hugely entertaining. He's played by Josh Hamilton, who I first sort of became aware of earlier this year when I watched that Blaze movie from Ethan Hawke. Yeah. He's one of the few traditional actors in it. You know, it's a movie that follows the career of a musician, so it's full of musicians, and Ethan Hawke chose to cast musicians to play musicians, which was a great decision, but it leaves a lot of heavy lifting for the few traditional actors in the movie, because every scene they become the anchor. They're the ones that are kind of holding it in place, and he does a remarkably good job of that in that film Blaze.
Sure.
And in this one, he plays sort of like the dad joke dad.
Right.
And what I mean is he's not played for laughs. He's not a silly character. He's not a dumb dad like you would see in a Disney movie or something like that.
Yeah, or a sitcom or whatever.
Yeah, but he's a single dad raising a 13-year-old daughter. She has no interest or time for him, and he's trying so hard to like get through because he sees that she's struggling with adolescence.
Right.
And he doesn't really know how to do it or what to say. And so a lot of times it just sort of boils down to, you know, dad jokes and lots of awkwardness. And,
embarrassing her in front of her friends, that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly, that sort of thing. It's a really entertaining movie. I enjoyed it a lot. Bo Burnham has a couple really good moments in there where his directing style, it's his first film, but you know what he knows to do as a director really shines through. A couple of moments that really stood out to me is there's just a really excellently rendered transition where you go from an awkward 13-year-old social interaction between the protagonist, who's shy outsider, and the most popular girl in school, to a smash cut of an active shooter drill taking place in the school.
Right.
And I mean, it's very jarring and, you know, very well done on the part of the director. And then the other is just a great little scene where the dad is driving the daughter to the mall to hang out with her friends, and she's having almost an anxiety attack about the social interaction of going and meeting all these new kids at the mall. And so she's kind of freaking out and just bouncing off her dad and like, you know, stressing out and kind of arguing with him a little bit. And he has no idea how to respond to it. And he's not doing anything wrong. And it's just this awkward, funny interaction. But Burnham directs it so that he's off frame the entire time. So you never see his physical reaction to anything. You just hear him struggling to navigate the conversation that he's having with his daughter, who's having this like emotional freak show happening in the passenger seat. It's just a really nicely shot scene. You know, the sophistication of the director to know that it's stronger if you can't see the father in that shot is, you know, it's not something that you would expect from a first-time director, especially one who, as far as I know, you know, doesn't really come from a production background in any way.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing to heap on your shoulders as a first-time director, to saddle yourself with a cast of a lot of kids, which, I mean, that seems so difficult to me now. He doesn't know any better because it's his directorial debut.
Right.
So if next time he directs a movie, if he moves away from having an all, you know, kid cast, it may or may not, you know, work for him better. I just think that's an interesting way to start your career as a director.
Yeah.
It's almost like, you know, you're starting with your foot in a hole there because, you know, I mean, I think it's pretty undeniably factual that for the most part, kid actors aren't going to be as good as their adult counterparts.
Yeah.
But, you know, as long as he gets that star, the main character who does a good job, then that's fine. Because that to me is a very underrated trait of a director is pulling a good performance out of an actor. You know, you talk about directing, you talk about setting up shots and the visual look and how the story's pieced together, but a very underrated ability of a director is to get a good performance out of an actor. And you can see that in other actors who sometimes they're just kind of and then when they work with a great director, you just say, wow, this guy had chops I didn't realize he had. And they go back to working with blah director and it's back to
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, in this case, it's a double whammy for the director because in addition to working with all kids, like I said, he doesn't really have a plot per se. There's nothing to wow you on the story front. All of the heavy lifting of this film is completely on the performances of the people in it. And
it's like a slice of life film.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Interesting watch. I would definitely recommend it to people who, you know, if that description sounds interesting, then for sure check it out.
Yeah, sounds good. That's one that's been on my radar for a while. I haven't gotten around to it yet, but definitely going to check it out based on your review here. All right, we're going to come back and we will talk about some news. Hollywood lost a couple of legends this week. First, earlier in the week, Stan Lee passed away at 95. Obviously, Stan, creator, co-creator, contributor to basically the entire Marvel universe.
Right.
And William Goldman, legendary screenwriter and novelist who wrote so many screenplays for so many popular movies. You can't really list them all.
Yeah, absolutely.
So sad week because both of these guys contributed mightily in their own way. You know, Stan Lee early on with the comics, and then this, I don't even know if career renaissance is a way to put it, because he was already a legend before the Marvel Cinematic Universe was ever a thing. He was already an iconic legend.
Right.
And then somehow he was already in the stratosphere and he shot to whatever comes after that.
Sure, absolutely. And, you know, it's one of those things where everyone who is a fan of those movies knows who he is because of his cameos. He pops up in every one of them. So, you know, kids know who this 95-year-old guy is. Everyone knows Stan Lee, you know? Yeah,
it's going to be sad when the first Marvel Cinematic Universe movie comes out that does not have a Stan Lee cameo. But from what I understand, they've shot several of those in advance. Is that right?
Yeah, I believe that is true.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah. I feel like he sort of picked up the baton of Walt Disney. You know, there's an entire, maybe 2 generations of Americans who like know who Walt Disney is, and they think of him when they think of Disney movies.
Right.
And I feel like there's now this generation of kids who have come up, and for them, it's Stan Lee. They know who Stan Lee is, and they think of Stan Lee when they think of Marvel Comics and stuff. Yeah,
and his name has become synonymous with cameos now. That was sort of a baton that was passed, I guess, from Alfred Hitchcock back in the day. That was his big deal in his movies.
Right.
So big time iconic legend lost there. Obviously a life well lived. I know the last couple of years of his life, it was a little bit sad because there was all sorts of quibbling going on in his personal life with his family. And man, I know at some point Kevin Smith offered to have Stan live with him until he weathered the storm and all this stuff with his family. So
yeah, tragically, the last few years were marred by, suspicions of elder abuse. Some unscrupulous family members were trying to get at his fortune, which I think is rumored to be like $70 million or something. So
wow, yeah. I mean, who know, it seems like it would be a lot bigger than that, but obviously we don't know what deals were cut early on in his career that have lasted all this time, you know, between the movies and the comics and the merchandising, and it's just so much. So so we'll definitely miss him. William Goldman, I mean, iconic screenplays for iconic movies. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, The Princess Bride. He wrote the screenplay for Misery. He wrote the screenplay for Maverick.
Yes. That's a personal favorite of mine.
Yeah. Marathon Man.
All the President's Men.
All the President's Men. I knew I forgot a big one.
Yeah.
A lot for him.
Won 2 Oscars. All the President's Men and was it Butch and Sundance?
It had to be Butch and Sundance, right? Or maybe it's one of those movies that's more loved now than when it first came out. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
He also had an uncredited contributing writing credit for Papillon, which is sort of, for me, like a sort of an underrated favorite if you haven't seen that.
Sure.
Stepford Wives is another big
the original
pop culture movie
Yeah.
that he was the writer for. He wrote the screenplay to A Bridge Too Far. I mean, so many others.
That is a massively underrated World War II film.
Yeah. And everyone's got their missteps.
He's got a few.
Yeah, we'll mention one. Dreamcatcher wrote the screenplay for Dreamcatcher.
Yeah, let's not dwell on that.
I will assign that to a group failure. Lawrence Kasdan, William Goldman, Stephen King obviously played a part there. I want to say Spielberg maybe was a producer on it. So we'll just skate past that.
Yeah.
Worst movie of all time. Anyway, so just
arguably, yes, that's not an exaggeration.
Yeah. So just a couple of just massive legends that you really can't describe their impact on their sectors of the industry.
Right.
Yeah. All right. So some more news. We will discuss a little bit of this. So JJ Abrams is apparently seeking a record-breaking $500 million studio deal, which is ambitious.
Yes.
And I think we'd all love to have that. I think everyone's parents have taught them when they're young, you're never going to get what you don't ask for. So you might as well try for your $500 million deal. So JJ, apparently, as you might expect, Disney is sort of thought to be in the lead for this deal, which is said to include, digital content, TV series development. He apparently is going to have access to X amount of movies per year on their slate. So it just basically sounds like whatever he can actually get done, he's going to be able to put out. So I if there's any filmmaker in current Hollywood that would probably be worth this deal, it'd probably be JJ Abrams.
No question. Pay the man. He's worth it. I mean, he's the only guy I can think of, with the possible exception of James Cameron. He's the only guy I can think of right now who's just hitting on all cylinders, who's, cracked the code and knows how to make consistent, massive blockbusters.
Yeah.
So that's a no-brainer. He, people like to liken him to Steven Spielberg, and, you can argue that one way or another, but the one thing that you can't really argue is right now he's the guy who has the magic touch, the way Spielberg did in the 80s. Right. JJ has that touch right now. Yeah.
My chief complaint with the JJ has just been that his whole thing is aping nostalgia, not necessarily stealing, but Spielberg was such a wholly original filmmaker, and JJ has his own way of originality, but he's also extremely nostalgia focused, which I think obviously it makes for some great entertaining movies, but it also I think is sort of bad for Hollywood in that it's just it doesn't clear enough room for more original content to come through.
Yeah, but that's just how Hollywood is right now. Sure. It's obsessed with the nostalgia.
And it's a business, man. I mean, I have no doubts about what anything you go into business for, you're there to make money, and that's just how it is.
Yeah, and he knows how to print it.
He's the guy, like you said, magic touch. All right, so Avengers 4, the running time is said to be 3 hours. Are you surprised? I'm not surprised.
I'm not surprised, but that is nonsense.
That is a lot.
That is a lot.
The previous one was a lot.
Yeah.
This is also a lot.
Man, Hollywood's just been drifting further and further into this realm of extra long movies for quite a while now.
All genres.
Yeah.
Yeah. Except for horror, really.
It's bizarre because people have this notion that if they like a movie, it's better if it's longer. But that's not actually how movies work.
Yeah.
It's longer isn't always better. You've got to keep it tight. You've got to keep it fast. You've got to keep it simple enough that it people can follow what's going on, and these kind of bloated films that just keep rolling longer and longer and longer. I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of it, but obviously they're making huge money, so I guess everybody else has a different opinion.
I feel like when you and I were younger and getting into movies and all that, the baseline was 90 minutes, and sometimes it might go to 2 hours.
Yeah.
And now the baseline has become 2 hours, and often they go to 2.5, sometimes 2:45.
Yeah, it almost seems like the runtime is linked to the budget. If the movie has a budget of over $100 million, it's 2 hours. If it has over $150 million, it's 2 hours and 20 minutes. If it's up there in the $200 million range, like I'm sure the Infinity War movies' budgets are, then there's no end to that runtime. 3 hours, why not?
Yeah, it seems strange because, like we talked about, movie making business, like any other business, is about making money. And you have a 3 hour movie, you're going to lose 1-2 showings a day potentially.
Yeah,
it just seems strange that there would be so many of them like that. I mean, especially since it seems like recently they've had this whole thing of splitting movies into two that really shouldn't be two.
Sure,
like the last Harry Potter two movies were famously should not have been more than one movie.
Yeah,
and I'm sure there are many other examples that I'm just not coming off the top of my head.
And arguably Infinity War could be one of those situations too. But in their defense, Marvel has been so massively successful for the last 10 years that, can you really blame them for going on a bit of a victory lap here to celebrate that 10-year anniversary, especially since we're really starting to get the sense that some of those big stars are going to be moving on to other things and leaving their roles behind.
Mm-hmm.
If they want to take 3 hours to give themselves a pat on the back, I can't really blame them.
Yeah. All right. Bohemian Rhapsody is now up to $313 million worldwide, 112 domestically. It actually was the second largest opening for a music biopic, second to Straight Outta Compton. But in total box office, it's far surpassed Straight Outta Compton, which is kind of an interesting thing.
Yeah, and it had a budget of sub $50 million.
Yeah. So I think I'm surprised actually at how well the movie's doing. I'm glad that it's got such legs overseas, and because as you know from previous episodes, we were both big fans of that one. And I'll be interested to see if if Rocket Man, the Elton John sort of biopic, also does well. If we'll get more of these, there's got to be like a Zeppelin movie out there, right?
I have no idea that the trailer for Rocket Man does not grab me the way the trailer for Bohemian Rhapsody at least suggested it might.
Right. Yeah, it seems like it's going to be a bit less about the music and a bit more about Taron Egerton playing Elton John.
Yeah, and I'm not a huge fan of him as an actor to begin with. Yeah. So,
Terrence, you want to tell us a little bit about some unfortunate result from the wildfires?
Yeah, so there were some as everybody knows, there are massive wildfires going on in California.
Ongoing.
And those are continuing to get closer and closer to Los Angeles and Hollywood in general. And recently, the Paramount Ranch in Agora Hills, California, got swept up in those wildfires. That is a historic Western standing outdoor set that's been used for many, many productions, but was currently being used on the Westworld series.
Yeah.
It is the location that they use for their Main Street scenes.
Yep.
They shoot in several places, including in Utah, but this is one of the iconic standing sets for that series. Completely wiped out, so that'll have to be, I guess, rebuilt from scratch. I'm not really sure how they move forward from that, but it's a pretty big loss for that show, but also a big loss for just kind of Hollywood history because it's been the location used for so many movies and TV shows over the years.
Yeah, pretty sad to go along with obviously the bigger issue, which is the human tragedy of that entire fire. Just incredible what's going on over there.
Yeah.
So Venom, this movie, the trailer didn't really do a whole lot for either of us, and it just didn't look like the kind of superhero comic book movie that would be a massive hit. But lo and behold, it's kind of sneakily having quite a year.
Yes, it is.
It's actually up over 200 million domestically, which I was surprised to read.
Yeah.
And it's approaching 700 million worldwide.
Yeah, I read just this past week that it has officially surpassed Justice League in box office take.
Wow, okay, that is, I guess, kind of surprising.
Yeah, so to put that into context, that means that a Marvel movie that's not even made by Marvel is doing better than
like a flagship DC property.
Yeah, exactly.
Not an offshoot.
Right.
Yeah.
That's quite a commentary there on how not popular those DC movies are turning out to be.
Yeah, and if you remember, before it was released, Tom Hardy had some, I don't want to say he was insulting the movie, but he had some sort of, not the typical things you hear a guy say when he's on a press tour where he's saying, oh, my favorite moments from the movie were left on the cutting room floor, and we both started thinking, this is not going to be good.
Yeah, that was a big red flag. That's an ouch moment for something for an actor to say. But
there it is.
Yeah, audience seems to really enjoy it. And I know Tom Hardy had the deal that he signed is an option for 2 additional Venom movies with this, or well, 2 additional films where he reprises that role. I don't know if those are specifically standalone Venom films or if there might be plans to tie Venom into some other comic book universe that might be going on at the moment. Yep. But either way, looks like we're going to get more Tom Hardy as Venom.
Yep. Not a bad thing.
No.
All right, we're going to come back with some development news. On to some development news now. So apparently, several years after the end of the highly lauded series Breaking Bad on AMC, they're going to make a movie. Apparently, the movie is going to involve Jesse Pinkman's character. This is Aaron Paul, who plays Jesse Pinkman. It's going to follow his character either picking up from or somewhere near after the end of the series. And this is another situation where I don't feel like there was a demand for this, but now that it was announced, there's been a lot of social media buzz about it. Bryan Cranston has sort of inserted himself in the discussion, which leads a lot of people to speculating as to whether or not they'll find a way to work him into the movie.
Yeah, and that rumor has already fizzled out. That there's no place for his character in the script at this point anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I can only imagine it would involve either flashbacks or him talking to Walter White as if he was still alive, and that is all bad stuff.
That being said, though, I mean, if you want to market it as, a continuation of Breaking Bad, can you really do that without any Bryan Cranston?
Yeah, that's kind of my concern too.
Yeah,
like he was the thing that made that show go, obviously.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I don't know what they can do after, but if Vince Gilligan, the show creator, is going to be heavily involved, which I assume he is going to be, either he directed a few episodes of the show, and I don't know if that's something he necessarily wants to continue to do, but he'll certainly, I assume, write it and have the story credit for sure and have total control over all that. So I'll be interested to see who they name as a director once they officially name someone. But and I'll be curious to see it. I don't really have any desire to see it on the big screen. I would assume that they're making this for AMC. I don't think they've actually said yet whether or not they're going to look at a theatrical release. But as a fan of the show, I'll definitely check it out. All right, so James Cameron is back, and James Cameron's movies are almost back. So James Cameron famously is one of those guys who makes a movie and then disappears for 10 years. Let me back up. James Cameron is a guy who disappears for many years, makes a movie that is the #1 movie of all time.
Yes.
Disappears, makes a movie again, and makes another highest grossing movie of all time, and then disappears again.
Yes.
So they have wrapped shooting, principal photography anyway, they've wrapped principal photography on the 2 Avatar sequels, number 2 and number 3. I believe originally the plan was to shoot 4 sequels. They apparently are only going to shoot 2 and then see how they do and base that on whether or not they're going to do the next 2, which seems like a smart thing, but at the same time, James Cameron has made his whole second half of his career on people doubting him and doing things that people say are not going to work. And not only do they work, but they work the best of all time.
Yeah. So, here's the guy who wrote and directed Titanic, which, as you said, was the highest grossing film of all time. And, the mega hit that launched everyone's careers. And then 10 years later, at a point where still no one had made a movie that surpassed Titanic, he went and made Avatar, which became the new highest grossing film of all time, and left Titanic in the dust. Mm-hmm. And now we're at a point in history where other people have come along and made films that have caught up with Titanic, but nothing has come within even spitting distance of Avatar.
Yeah.
James Cameron's success is on a level unlike anyone else in Hollywood right now. And he's about to release 2 sequels. And like you said, the plan is to do 4. This talk about, just shooting 2 and waiting and seeing how they do, I don't know that that's necessarily true. I mean, you just have to assume that there's some other reason at play for why they're taking the break. Right. Maybe the script calls for it. The characters need to age. There's a jump in time. I don't know for sure.
Yeah.
Regardless of that, it'll be interesting to see how this plays out, because it's easy to think that they missed their window of opportunity. Like that first one came out so long ago. And, there's so many things have come along. Star Wars has resurfaced since then. The Marvel Cinematic Universe has risen up since then. It's easy to say, well, the timing might be off for this. But again, just never underestimate James Cameron.
Don't doubt him.
Always bet on James Cameron. I suspect these movies are going to hit. They're going to hit like a nuclear bomb. And I think they're going to be the thing that sort of disrupts the current formula for Hollywood.
Right.
Because Avatar, it's potentially something that will be much, much bigger than the entirety of the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
And it's obvious that it's such a passion project for Cameron.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that. But I also know that he's going to disappear for another 10 years when these come out. And when he comes back, if we get more Avatar, that's fine if it's good. But he's one of those filmmakers where I want him to do more varied stuff because he's so damn talented. But at the end of the day, it's James Cameron. I'm just going to sit back and watch whatever he releases, and I'm not going to question the man.
Yeah. And he's one of the few people who is making big budget, top tier, A-list films, who is also his own producer, writer, and director. That's something that you see a lot in smaller films, but that translation to the big budget stuff, those roles get split into a bunch of different people, but not Cameron. Like those are his films.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so we still have a ways to go. They're tentatively loosely on the schedule to be released in December 2020. And then again, the next one in December 2021. So we have a ways to wait. And then maybe around December of 2035, we'll have the next two. All right. So Shrek. Remember that classic Shrek from so long ago?
Oh my God.
Many years.
Yeah. It was a movie my parents loved when they were kids.
So apparently the thirst is real for a Shrek reboot. Not really. But here's the kicker. They're going to reboot Shrek. It's going to be headed up by the guy who created Despicable Me, and they're apparently trying to get Mike Myers, Antonio Banderas, and Eddie Murphy to reprise their roles, which means it's not a reboot.
Yeah.
So I don't understand what's happening with this. Why not just call it a long-delayed sequel?
Right? I need somebody to kind of give me an idea of what is rebootish about this.
Yeah, and obviously hugely popular property, but I didn't detect the thirst for it. But that's like, there's been this thing in Hollywood where all these remakes and all these movies on existing properties have come up, reboots, blah, blah, blah. But now there's a whole new sector of reboots that I classify as reboots that I didn't realize anyone had any desire to see.
Right.
I get reboots for hugely popular movies that have come out in the last several years, whatever. But now we've got reboots of recent movies like Shrek and Pirates of the Caribbean. And I know there's a couple other ones out there that are coming out soon. And the slate of movies every year is shrinking for an original movie. Fine, base it on a novel, I don't care. But it used to be like, I just want to see a movie that's based on an original screenplay, and that's it.
Right.
And now I'd love to see a listing of how many of those come out a year that actually have a budget and a studio and some real actors. Those have all shifted to independent movies now, it seems like.
Yeah.
So it's fine. You got to make money. It's the whole business. But man, I just can't fathom how we're going through this period now where we're taking 10-year-old movies and remaking them.
Right. It's like, if you're going to make a reboot, at least dig into the vaults and find some really old movie that people are just vaguely aware of, but that had a strong story or concept, and remake that. Instead of, hey, remember this movie that you saw just 10 years ago?
Yeah.
Hey, we're going to make it again.
I think Ocean's 11 is a good example. The original movie wasn't really of much note. It wasn't a great movie, but the concept was kind of interesting, and it was perfect for a reboot.
Sure. Or a more timely example would be A Star is Born.
There you go.
There you go.
And it's baffling, but that's always going to be a constant source of annoyance for us. So we mentioned a running time on this is just sort of a throwaway here. We mentioned the running time on the next Avengers movie. apparently Aquaman's rumored runtime is set to be 143 minutes.
That is 2 hours and 23 minutes of Jason Momoa talking underwater to CG seahorses.
Yes. I couldn't get through a 2.5 minute trailer hardly.
Oh, it looks so bad.
And now I'm expected to get through.
It looks so bad.
Oh boy.
I don't know what is happening at Warner Brothers, but if you were to tell me that they were intentionally trying to make bad movies, I would say there is plenty of evidence to suggest that is correct.
Yeah, I don't really know what's going on with that. It doesn't look good to me, and I've seen the trailer in theaters enough times now too, where I sense the folks around me where the people making the trailer are expecting the oohs and the ahs, and what I hear are a bunch of chuckles.
Yeah, yeah. You know what would really all right. I don't want to get. This topic is exhausted enough. I don't want to spend any more time talking about the Aquaman movie.
Fair enough. We'll wait for your standalone 30-minute screaming rant of Aquaman. All right. A couple of more development news items we want to get to here quickly. Joining Jon Favreau's The Mandalorian is a second live-action Star Wars series being planned and developed for the Disney streaming service, which we know now is going to be called Disney+. It is going to be a Rogue One prequel that follows Diego Luna's character, Cassian Andor. He was a rebel spy. And so Disney Plus is really lining up the content now for their apparent late 2019 launch, which now has, as I mentioned, The Mandalorian. It has this live action series. It's supposed to have at least MCU shoot-off character series on Loki, the Scarlet Witch, a couple others I think that they mentioned a couple of weeks back that were in development, the Winter Soldier, and one more that I'm not remembering, but you get the
Falcon
point.
Character.
Yeah, sure, that guy.
Yeah.
So a lot of stuff in the pipeline for that. So how do you feel about yet another live-action Star Wars? I'm fine to see it. They're like I said, they're loading up the pipeline. You know, I want to see what they're going to do with this. Again, it's prequels. Your favorite.
Yeah, so let's just address my issue with this, which is, for those of you who can't remember which Star Wars movie is which, Rogue One is the successful standalone one. It's set during the original trilogy. You've got an ensemble cast. They go on a suicide mission, and spoiler alert, they all die. Mm-hmm. It wraps up, it's tidy, it's completely self-contained. Now they're going to take one of those characters who is dead at the end of the movie, and in order to continue to tell stories with him, they're going back and they're telling a prequel story. I don't care about prequels. They are so uninteresting to me. I don't care about the story before the thing that's interesting happens. Don't tell me what happens before Batman shows up. Don't tell me what happens before the character has to do the exciting thing that you made a movie about. I don't care about that lead up stuff. And on top of that, there's now kind of Diego Luna has made some comments that Diego Luna's a young dude. Like, he's a young actor, and he's saying that for the purposes of this series, they might digitally de-age him. Like, that's how young they want this character to be in this ridiculous prequel series.
The portion of your rant that starts with "I don't care about prequels" may or may not just be a pre-recorded drop that we put into every episode.
Yeah, there are so many prequels being made right now, and it's clearly not going to stop anytime soon,
right, that
I'm just going to have to keep complaining about the same thing again and again and again and again. Yeah. I mean, I could just do it once and stop, but I'm not going to.
You did. We just play it every episode.
That's right. Consider every complaint I have about prequels a prequel to my previous complaint.
Yes. I think I have more of a problem with reboots, so we can just, between the two of us, we're just annoyed by basically every release.
With the way Hollywood works right now, we are both in a great deal of trouble.
Yes. All right. So how about a little bit of Star Trek Discovery news, Terrence?
Well, so speaking of reboots and prequels and whatever else, there is yet another Star Trek spinoff being developed for CBS All Access. That is CBS's answer to the soon-to-be-released Disney Plus streaming service. Disney has Star Wars. CBS has Star Trek. They've already got one series, Star Trek Discovery. They're taking one of the characters from that series, and they're going to spin her off into her own series. That is Michelle Yeoh's character. And then they announced several weeks ago that there's another Star Trek series being developed for CBS All Access, and that will star Patrick Stewart, revising his role as Captain Picard from Star Trek The Next Generation. Clearly, CBS is going all in on Star Trek. They're, I guess, basically trying to use it to build their entire streaming service, which I don't believe is very successful at this point.
Yeah. I mean, if you gauge these things by buzz, I mean, I think both of us are at least in one way plugged into social media. Like, we're not constant, timeline refreshers, but we are on enough, and we have enough things that we follow on Twitter and other places to sort of gauge interest in a lot of the pop culture stuff, especially the stuff that we're interested in, which is the stuff we're talking about. And I just never see a whole lot of thirst for for Star Trek. I never see a lot of buzz about the existing show,
right?
Which to me makes it feel like there probably won't be a lot of interest in all the spinoffs and the Picard one and this one and some of the other digital content I think they're preparing. So, I mean, give them room and let them do their thing, and we as consumers will have to decide if we want to pay for yet another streaming service.
Yeah.
Spoiler, I'm not going to.
That's definitely the barrier for entrance for all of these up-and-coming streaming services, is that it's just one more subscription for people to have to keep going. And it's quickly becoming apparent that, you can cut your cable service, but you're not going to get to keep any of that money. You're going to have to now put it into these streaming services because they're only going to become more and more fractured. Like, these companies are figuring out that the profit is in a niche that only they can exploit and not in a big umbrella like Netflix. Who knows where Netflix is going to be in a few years? They're already starting to feel the heat from the other services.
It's just strange to me that the combination of what it feels like a lack of interest in additional Trek properties and the added part of having to access it through a streaming service, that just doesn't seem like good business sense to me. But obviously we're not Hollywood executives and we know what the hell we're talking about. But just common sense wise, you've already got one barrier and then you put up another huge barrier. I just don't feel like there's enough buzz out there to justify anyone really going through with that unless you're just like super, super Trek heavy.
And well, I was just going to ask you, if you aren't subscribing to a service that has a Star Trek series, is 3 Star Trek series going to make you do it?
No.
Because if you're not a Star Trek fan, that is certainly not going to attract you. Yeah. And if you are, you either are a big enough fan that you subscribe for one show, or you're not a big enough fan. And I don't think that 3 shows is going to be the thing that pushes you over.
Yeah. Just a lot of strange there. All right. There's a couple more things we want to get to just real quickly.
Well, let's hit these fast.
Yeah. Tell us about Chris Pratt.
So Chris Pratt is currently in talks to star in a movie reboot of The Saint. The Saint was a popular spy television series from the 60s starring Roger Moore before he became James Bond. There might have been a few other actors who took on that role too. I think it was kind of a popular character, especially in England. More recently, in the 90s, they tried to reboot it again, at that point starring popular Val Kilmer as an actor. I think he'd just come off the heels of his turn at Batman.
Right.
And chose not to reprise that role and instead take a crack at The Saint. It's laid dormant since then, and now Chris Pratt is in talks to do it. Love Chris Pratt, big fan of his, have no interest in seeing this.
Yeah, that was that 90s movie, Val Kilmer, before he entered his late Marlon Brando stage.
Yeah,
which he's now been in for like 15 years.
Yeah, before he discovered the buffet.
That's right. And one more piece of news that I'm actually kind of excited about because of who's writing it.
Yeah, this is kind of curious. So Dan Akroyd has told the world that wheels are still turning on a possible Ghostbusters 3. He is still working on a screenplay for it, and no one's told him to stop. So that might actually happen. You may kind of remember that when the Ghostbusters reboot starring the all-female cast came out, there was some buzz about how that sort of derailed a possible Ghostbusters 3 starring the original cast. Well, apparently that film and its weak box office didn't completely derail those plans. They're still in motion, and Dan Akroyd still thinks there's a fighting chance that it could happen. Again, we can file this under the Shrek reboot and ask, is there a thirst for this? It's been a really long time, and That cast is pretty up there in years.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Maybe they want to do some sort of passing of the baton sort of thing.
Right. Yeah. As long as it's not like a Space Cowboys thing where it's just going to be them sad and old.
Yeah.
Throughout the entire movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I don't want to see that.
Is there still all 4 of them still alive?
I think so. Yeah.
I know Ivan Reitman.
Oh no, Harold Ramis.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I thought. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. So they're down to just 3 of the original cast even still. All right.
Rest in peace, Harold Ramis.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, guys. That's all we have for you on this episode. You can hit us up on Twitter at TechBloodPod. Terrence, any parting words?
If you get a chance and you have an interest in it, I would encourage you to see Akroyd.
Check back again for more episodes coming up. Thanks, guys.